We're actually going to move on to service delivery. And so, Sean, we've talked a little bit about shared services at our conference. It's been actually one of the most popular topics. And so we'd like to ask you to share what are some of the trends that you're seeing in shared services and what functional activities actually represent a shared service center?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because shared services as a concept has been around a long time. I would say that what we saw, particularly in the 90s going into the early 2000s, were that many companies were practicing more centralization than they were true shared services. So, I think as we've talked about today, and Peter mentioned some of this as well as Yulela, around service level agreements and managing a service center as a commercial organization. So, really as a standalone, separate business unit. And once a process goes in there, managing that very differently than maybe what it was managed when it was within a function, whether that be HR and finance for payroll, for example, depending where payroll would sit. Once it's in a service center, then really looking at some of the metrics that we showed you, for example, in the performance study, really being on a scorecard that's managed month after month for ongoing improvements and efficiency gains. I think the other side of that, though, is really what we've seen companies do is both accelerate where they have processes they put into a shared service center in terms of saying, how can I maybe go out to some of the other businesses, other geographies that I haven't put into a center, and where are my centers? So rather than having a national center, Hackett's research has shown that most companies are going from national locations where they center transactions into more of a regional model. And really the leading or best practice or world-class companies are going to more of a global model, where they're trying to put more of that into one global location for both getting the critical mass they need to have people have a more streamlined delivery structure, as well as to afford more opportunities for those folks that do work in those centers, because there'll be more management layers at that point. There'll be more different types of processes that they can go into. Equally important, though, is more of the concept of global business services. So going from shared services for finance, shared services for HR, IT, and so forth, and saying, how can we now combine those and have one individual or one group that runs all of those shared services across multiple functions? So that's really the other trend that's going on. And then finally, I would say that for those companies that have had shared services and offshoring for a while, they're now taking another look at outsourcing, where maybe some of them never have. But I would say that they're doing it in a different way. And I'll have one more comment on outsourcing in a second. But for those that are in centers today, they're thinking of how can I start to parse off some of those processes now that I've got them as efficient as I can, and now turn them over to someone else where it really doesn't make sense for that part of the process for us to do it long term. However, equally, we're finding some of our clients are saying it's going the other way, which is I've given processes to some of the outsourcers and I'm having service issues. Fundamental issues, such as I was mentioning just this morning, one of our clients was saying, look, I've outsourced some of my payroll, and all of a sudden we're not getting payroll runs completed correctly. And you better believe there's certain service levels you don't mess with, and one of those is paid in full and on time with payroll, right, as you all know. So a very hot issue. So there's some fundamentals that you have to do right. Other things along those lines of, gee, I moved a person 6 months ago in my organization, and they still haven't updated the HRMS system to reflect that. So those are fundamental building blocks of an outsourcer that I think all companies need to be aware of, is that there are some pitfalls, and you need to think through very thoroughly who you're dealing with, what processes you're going to outsource. To the last topic, which is what's actually going into a shared service center now that may be different, particularly from a finance perspective, the single, I'd say in our top 3 inquiries we get from clients is not so much around the transaction processing, because they understand they need to do more, but now they're looking into other areas like tax and treasury. They're looking into areas like financial planning and analysis. So how can we set up a reporting factory, for example, to do standardized reporting out of a shared services environment? A lot of areas that companies haven't been willing to touch before, they're really looking to, I've had success now with some of the transactional processes, how can I extend that out into more of the kind of corporate-owned or business unit-owned processes in the past? So really, those are some of the trends that we're seeing in shared services.
Okay.